So I wanted to welcome the Auditor General to us, and our new committee chair with me is Ben Sanchez. We're both CPAs. Ben?
Thank you, Frank. Representative Ryan, great to see you, General.
Representative,
Thank you.
always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
What I thought we'd do is, you gave us a great briefing last year about the critical risk factors
Right.
that we see, and then you and I kind of had a discussion about a letter that I sent out to you and to the Treasurer and to the Attorney General about the school district. So I kind of preface it on your updates about some of the issues that you see are critical issues facing the Commonwealth. And I would like to talk to you about the school districts, excuse me, and just to frame the issue for people who are listening. I became concerned, and I think you shared the same concern, with the comprehensive annual financial report at the state level does not include any liability for the PSERS pensions, with the exception of those school districts or those teachers who happen to be on the state payroll.
Right.
So it's a limited dollar. I think it's 290 million, some number like that. And your department has done a phenomenal job of being very transparent, I think. And that report that you've done, and Dan has done, by the way, congratulations on Dan being a new dad.
That's right, yeah.
It's a great thing. That what it does is the House Bill 453 that you're reporting on all this potential savings, that number is still holding up at a fairly high number.
Right.
And we've got a couple of bills pending to give the Auditor General subpoena power and things. So what I'd like to ask you is, one is the critical factors, risk factors that you see for the Commonwealth. Have we turned the tide? And the second issue is on the school districts from your perspective, and I know you're drafting something, so this is more of a work in progress discussion that we're having. Where do you see the liability for a school district that might happen to avail itself of Act 47, to be forced in Act 47, or God forbid, an involuntary filing in bankruptcy if it were to go to a federal bankruptcy court under some weird perspective that an out-of-state company might choose to try to do it in a different jurisdiction. So with that, if I could just kind of get your perspective on it.
So if we just go from 40,000 feet, generally speaking, the state is doing good, but could be doing better. I mean, look, our unemployment rate is at historically low numbers, but still, I still think you could make a pretty fair argument that a lot of people are still feeling squeezed about, that their incomes haven't been rising to meet inflation. But from the state coffer perspective, look, revenues are up. And so where we were 3 or 4 years ago to today is an improvement. Unemployment down, some wage growth, but not enough to meet the rate of inflation. People still feeling squeezed, but that's generally better than where we were 3 or 4 years ago. And the state itself is just doing better on the revenue picture. My job is to point out where the pitfalls still are, because there's always going to be challenges. And the biggest one I see that, that it popped from where I was when we testified the last time is the issue with the Turnpike and PennDOT, I believe, is getting to critical mass. The Turnpike, and I know people say the law was passed to scale down what the Turnpike needs to hand over to PennDOT. That is accurate, although even that, there's no revenue to help the Turnpike pay for that money that they're sending to PennDOT. And then two, the issue with the state police, and again, I want to be clear to everybody that it is not the state police's fault, but local governments getting rid of their local police departments and the state police being, in a sense, forced to do local police coverage, that taking about a little over $4 billion away in the last 6 years from the motor license fund. If you combine those two issues together and look at them in total, we have a looming infrastructure crisis combined with something that is just societal, which is, I believe the gas tax is becoming a dinosaur. And what I mean by that is, look, 1980, 1983, there were no hybrid cars. There were no electric cars. Today, if you have an electric car, you're not paying the gas tax, but you're still using the road. And again, I'm not here to condemn people for using electric cars, but as you have more fuel efficient standards, more electric cars, more hybrid cars on the road, the gas tax is becoming more of a burden on the people that have those type of vehicles, combined with more local governments getting rid of their police department, forcing state police to cover more area, taking more money away from the motor license fund, and a turnpike that next year will have more debt than the entire Commonwealth combined. So if you combine those three general broad principles, I believe that there is a looming transportation crisis coming in Pennsylvania.
First of all, I wanted to mention that we've got Bridget from Matt Bradford's office is here, and Representative Bradford's been a big supporter. And Pam, welcome. Welcome to the group. We just got started relative to some questions. Now, let me ask you a question on that. I've done bankruptcy work most of my life and turnarounds. There's usually something that trips first, and then when it trips it, it creates somewhat of a downward spiral. And I agree with your assessment 1,000%. I think you've really nailed the issues. But I'm seeing a whole bunch of issues, such as first aid and safety patrol in my area, the first responders, the reimbursement rates are not sufficient, and they're struggling. I think the infrastructure assessment you gave is right on the money. I'm new to government, as you know. I'm surprised, I was saying this to Ben beforehand, I'm surprised at how slow we are, and in a turnaround, you can't.
Right.
Do you have any concerns like that, that some issues could sneak up on us that will fall?
The short answer is yes, but because you're right. Let's just take, and I'm not comparing the two, but just trying to give an analysis. People that were paying attention to the real estate market knew a bubble was being created in 2003 to 2004, 5, 6 timeframe. They knew this was coming, but general society wasn't quite aware because they were viewing things in the micro, their own home mortgage or what have you. Once it popped, the spillover effect into so many different sectors, because so many things are linked in our economy today. Not just, it used to be like if something bad happened in Tulsa, it was just bad in Tulsa. That is not the world we're living in today. I mean, we literally have a situation now where if there is, and again, without weighing in on the policy of it, the president tweets a potential tariff on a potential product in another region of the country, and it causes a stock market decline that then impacts the world economy for at least a brief period of time. That's the world we're living in, and people can say whether they like that or not. I can say, I want to be 6'5" and throw 98 miles an hour. That ain't happening. This is the world we're living in, and we have to understand that all of this economy is interconnected. What is happening internationally with if there is a troop deployment to the Middle East to deal with a potential military confrontation with Iran, we all know that that causes a ripple effect to the economy of northeastern Pennsylvania. And so the world we're living in, so coming back to now the main, I think where you're going is, if something bad happens to the turnpike and it can't pay its bills, the ripple effect through our entire transportation system is going to be massive.
And I would ask all the other members, any other questions that you have. Going to the school district funding question for a second. I'm concerned that if we're trying to raise money and there is a ripple effect such as with the turnpike, I would envision that the state would probably have to come in and do something to honor that debt, because I think an awful lot, and again, that's just a Frank Ryan gut feel. I don't have any legislative comment on that, but my concern is that I'm probably one of the few people other than your staff and you who've read all 500 CAFRs for all 500 school districts.
I think it is fair to say that is a limited number of Americans.
And I would tell you that's because they have a life and I don't.
I won't go there because I respect your position. I'm just here to say that it is a limited number of Americans that have read all the CAFRs.
And I would concur with that because they're smarter than I am. But I was surprised at the financial condition of the school districts. And when I added up all
it's duct tape right now.
It is, and in much more of a way than I thought it was. Yeah. And so I'm concerned about, and again, just to help everybody else, to bring people up to date, I'm of the opinion that we have to deal in reality. And if the Peaser's pension is something that really will eventually be picked up by the state, it probably should be shown at least as a footnote in our financials, if not disclosed. And my fear is that we've got everything so segmented. So I'll give you an example. I added up all the other post-employment benefit and all the unfunded pension liabilities of the school districts. And unless I'm doing something wrong, it doesn't add up to the unfunded pension liability that Peaser says. And so I'm
By the way,
thinking,
just so you know, the bond markets take all of that into account when it comes to the rates we have to pay when the state goes out to borrow. So whether we put it on the sheet or not.
they're looking at it?
They're looking, absolutely.
Okay.
I know that for a fact.
Well, that's the kind of thing that's particularly helpful.
Absolutely.
And again, I want to mention, we're joined by Representative Brett Miller. Any questions anybody else has, please let us know. So from your perspective, as that letter that we sent to you asking your take on the Peaser's liability, can you give us kind of a thumbnail sketch of like what we were discussing before the meeting got started?
So I want to be clear when I say that this is just my general opinion. It should not be construed as the ironclad legal opinion of the Department of the Auditor General, because we are in discussions with Peasers on this. Although I will tell you that it is my view at the construction of school districts are the creatures of the state. And by that, for example, there is nothing clearer than in the 1950s, there were 2,000 school districts roughly, and the state passed a law merging them into 501 school districts. How can they not be creatures of the state if the state has the ability to eliminate or create a school district? So that to me is just a construction of statutory law. Then you look at the Pennsylvania Constitution, and it is clear. Every child has a right to a thorough and efficient public education. So if you look at statutory construction, constitutional construction, then you look at the amount of money the state spends on school districts, I don't know how anyone can logically argue that school districts aren't creatures of the state and ultimately the state responsibility. Now, we do have a lot of local control, usually dealing with policy. And so there would be, I know, arguments on both sides. But for example, when we look at the Penn Hills School District and the audit I did there and the $170 million they are in debt, there were a lot of local bad decisions made. However, the State Department of Education had the ability to reject their construction of their new school buildings, and they chose not to exercise that power. So again, you come back to the state had a role in that, and Penn Hills gets a pretty significant chunk of their funding from the state. So if Penn Hills can't pay their bills, I believe the state would have, as me, just as citizen, the responsibility to step in. Having said that, even if it is ultimately ruled that the state does not have that responsibility, which in the courtroom, we all know that you never know what happens. Does anybody really think the state is just going to let those kids from Penn Hills not go to school? I'm just saying, in my opinion, that's politically untenable.
Frank, just shifting gears from the school
Yeah.
districts for a second, General. You touched on the Turnpike and PennDOT. Did you, in the debt specifically, but were you in that risk factor identification? Was the trucker lawsuit part of that, or are you?
We flagged
more-
that in our, so for those of you who don't know, the truckers have filed a lawsuit saying basically that the Turnpike tolls are illegal. We flagged that as an item in our audit of the Turnpike, but we did not add it to the financial statement simply because it was so unknown. And again, me personally, because you never know what happens when you get in front of a courtroom, is that while I think their policy has merit, I don't believe the toll increases are illegal. So I had a difference of opinion on how that would turn out, although policy-wise, I certainly got their point. But we did flag it as something that was out there.
Which I think was entirely appropriate, obviously, for disclosure and identification. Are you, for lack of a better word, calmer on that point now that it seems the Commonwealth Court rule
Yeah,
is still at risk, or if you choose
Calmer,
not to
yes.
comment.
I mean, the one that had always scared me about that lawsuit wasn't them saying, moving forward, PennDOT can't make the payments. The part of that I would say was scary, and you still get amazed at sometimes willingness of Harrisburg to just sort of pretend things aren't happening, is that part of that lawsuit was going back in time to force a repayment back to the Turnpike of billions of dollars.
Exactly.
And if that had happened, I think that's where all bets were off. But I also felt it was virtually impossible for any court to side with that. But that was the part of the lawsuit that most scared me.
Right.
And it wasn't dismissed out of hand. The part where Commonwealth Court sided against the truckers and with the Turnpike. But I want to be pretty clear abundantly clear about this. The lawsuit wasn't dismissed, which meant
Right.
a judge felt it had at least enough merit to get a hearing.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Apologize for missing your presentation. We had a voting meeting, but I participate in this particular caucus to both learn, educate myself, and I'm of the opinion that the Commonwealth is only as healthy as its financial state is, and our policy can only advance when we have a healthy financial environment. Do you have any sense on how we rank in terms of, and I know rankings nationally, you can rank 49th, but everybody could be within 1/8 of a percentage point of everybody. And, when you do rankings, somebody's going to be last, somebody's going to be first. It's really, and you have to look at the whole picture, all the numbers. It's indicative of nothing. But if there were the top 3 things, you served in the House, I had that opportunity to serve with you a few years back. If there were 3 things as you sit in your current seat to say, from my former legislative perspective, in addition to my current Auditor General perspective, these are the 3 things the General Assembly should do sooner than later, what would those 3 things be?
Well, broadly speaking, I think it is very clear that the middle class is still feeling squeezed despite practically full employment. So finding a way to try to address that middle class squeeze in some way, shape, or form, that would be 1. 2, I think there's a lot of anxiety about healthcare, particularly with the state issue would be on the prescription drugs. And we've done some audits on these pharmacy benefit managers, the billions of dollars that the state is putting out for that I don't believe the taxpayers or the consumers of Pennsylvania are getting the benefit of that, still paying too high for prescription drugs. So that would be certainly 2. And 3, I am very concerned about the general state of the financial status of schools. I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty of the quality of the education, because we know there's different performance across the state. But I am concerned about that financial condition of the schools, and if that were to persist, that eventually will have an impact on the academic performance as well. So I would say the middle class squeeze, cost of prescription drugs, and the financial situation of our schools would be, broadly speaking. Then I'm very concerned about our overall transportation funding. And I'm also very concerned about our workforce development. I mean, I do think that our audit and the governor's office took it seriously and we're moving forward, but I am not convinced right now that our basic ed and our higher ed are preparing our young people for the skills they're going to need in the future. So that would be transportation and workforce would be the 2 issues moving forward that I would be certainly concerned with as well.
Thank you.
We've also been joined by Representative Barbara Gleiman.
Hanging over there just so so you can, I don't know where the questions are coming from.
Brett, do you have any questions? Again, I want to be careful I don't monopolize a lot of the time, because we've got tons of questions to ask.
Sure. Thank you. And again, I was at the voting meeting as well.
Lottery funds, money.
Yeah. Question for you about the pension system. The Public Pension Management Investment Commission gave several recommendations. And one, broadly, your perspective on some of those recommendations, if you recall what they were, but in particular related to transparency over the alternative investments and how the investments are paid for, and your thoughts on that in general.
So, for starters, there are things where I understand we have policy disagreements in America. Where, if you put we got 5 legislators, myself, there's, we probably, if you just sat down and our views on whether it be charter school, death penalty, wars, we would all have different views on that. And that's part of our democracy. This lack of transparency on these fundings, I don't know who's the opposition to this other than the people stealing from the taxpayers. And I find it absolutely outrageous that this is going on right under the nose of government leaders, and you have a Vanguard that is right down the street that has a stock index fund, very low fee structure. Montgomery County shifted all of their pensions into that is doing very well. And meanwhile, we're forking over $600 million a year to Wall Street management firms that aren't even beating the stock index fund. And these are the things that, I just, I sit around and go, who's the opposition to changing this? Because if you put that on a ballot, what's it get, 98.6% of the vote? And I just know because statistically speaking, somebody's going to read the question wrong and vote the other way. So that to me is absolutely outrageous. I think there is, in my opinion, this is something that I think if you drove it from the rank and file in the legislature, because I'm driving it from the rank and file across the board, both parties, this to me is not ideological. If you're making money off the pension system and not even beating the stock index fund, and the boards of these pension funds are in a sense trying to shield the public from finding, we did the audits of this, and I can tell you, they make it so that you don't know what's actually getting paid to these people. It's designed that way, and it's outrageous. But I have some strong feelings on that.
I couldn't tell.
Yeah.
As you probably know, the actual language of the legislation prohibits the General Assembly from even knowing what these fees are.
Yeah, by the way, so on that one, it's sort of like the PBMs where I'm not allowed to audit that money. Think about, this is one thing, and we know there's pluses and minuses in today's world. I always say, look, there's good and bad with everything, right? One good thing about social media is stuff like that could not pass today. If somebody took a snapshot of that and put it on Twitter and Facebook, the calls to your offices, I've been there, I know, would go through the roof. Just think about the idea of even putting that into a draft proposal. I think I've got political courage. I would be afraid to read a language like that. Well, I'd blow it up. I'd go. I'm telling you right now. So you work together. You got some D's and R's right here.
Yeah, we do.
You could join together, put a bill. I'd go right after that. Make them come at you on that. And then you can go right into that rotunda and say, "Isn't it a shame that Wall Street's attacking us for trying to save Pennsylvania taxpayer dollars? I know where the public's going to be, and they're going to be with you. They're not going to be with Wall Street."
Well,
and make other legislators, regardless of party, attack you for trying to fight for more transparency on where the tax dollars and by the way, the rank and file pensioners, they're going to be with you as well.
As you probably know, there were several recommendations that came out of the PPMAIRC Commission, which some of us here are involved with drafting legislation to implement those recommendations, because I think all of us, despite particular views on the actual pension program, right. I think we are all interested in efficiency, transparency, and the biggest bang for the buck, that money's not going out the door but going into the fund to make it stronger. So I appreciate your comments on that. Thank you.
I just want to echo your comment on that. Is financial issues are really bipartisan.
I would even, and I know we got to use sometimes the term, they're not even partisan issues. To me, it's just a matter of are you going to do the right thing or not.
And that's where one of the things, that's what I love about this committee. We have a really good smattering of Democrats and Republicans, all of whom are concerned. It's interesting, Representative Bradford and I have different philosophical issues, but his comment was, he said, I think I'm probably as fiscally conservative as you are. And I'm not even sure that's a good word to use.
I would say
because-
it's fiscally responsible.
There we go. He and I came up with the same idea. So following
That
that,
gets us away from the silly terms that we all feel we have to use from time to time.
absolutely. So the question that comes up in terms of the systems of controls, as you know, I've been a big believer of what your department does, and I think I just think very highly of your department. I mean, I really do. And so we've got a number of initiatives, and I think you all have met the challenge across the board. When you look at the subpoena power and things of that nature, and we've done some things with the Office of Inspector General last term with Senator Almond, will that help you to be able to get down to some of these other things as we start knocking down these barriers? Will that provide some degree of assistance so we can start focusing our energy at solving the problems before it's too late?
The answer is, I believe, is yes. Some people may disagree. I believe it's yes. And you just look at the Harrisburg School District refusing to cooperate with the Pennsylvania Department of Education on their audit when the state funds the district at 72%. Again, I don't think that's ever appropriate, but at least if you have a district that the state is a minor player in the funding, again, I don't like it, but I can at least see some pushback. That was outrageous, and we're obviously internally determining the best path of action that'll be announced soon from our end. But that would be one area where haul them in,
And we'll
answer
keep,
questions under oath.
and we really appreciate your staff working with it. Dan has been absolutely so. Stephanie been tremendously helpful, and thank you for your cooperation.
Absolutely.
We've also been joined by Representative Wendy Thomas as well. So, thank you.
We brought up an issue earlier, just maybe see, I believed that it's a small amount of people that have read all 500 school district CAFRs. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would, I read two.
Okay.
My two districts.
Yeah, you're too. Oh, yeah, I know, you read your own, but, or at least, so you stand with me on that one, that the amount of people that have read all 500 is limited?
Yes, you and Frank.
That was our initial reaction.
Yeah, I got abused at a finance committee meeting today, and I'm going to start claiming elder abuse. I just want to tell you in the process. When you look at it, do you see a situation, and any other members have questions as well, do you see a situation at which a point could occur in the Commonwealth to where we go, like say another recession, where we say, we just don't have enough resources? Can that happen?
There's two parts to this answer. One is, we are in a financially, I don't want to say weak, but we are in a weaker position right now than when the last recession hit. And what I mean by that is, the pension funds were at a higher funding ratio. There was generally more money in the state coffers. So I want to be clear, I'm not saying the state is in a weak position, but relative. So if it were to start today, we are in a weaker position today than when the last hit happened, okay? I think that, to me, is almost undeniable, but, you know, we're living in a world now where people love denying everything. Somebody gets mad at me when I say it's sunny outside. Oh, yeah, blah, 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 yeah, you should enjoy the sun. You have this, so whatever. But that, I think, is ironclad. But I don't believe the state could ever say we don't have resources, because the federal government would not, unless there's a change in federal law, allow a state to declare bankruptcy. The state may have to choose which things to cut, but I don't think we'd ever be allowed to be in a situation to say, that's it, we're not paying our bills.
In the case of Puerto Rico, the government, President Obama, and I was very fortunate to get called in on some of that aspect, came up with promesas where it requires United States Senate action then affirmed by the president the Supreme Court, when the first bill came up with President Obama, Speaker Ryan, and I forget who the Senate Majority Leader was at the time, the Supreme Court was asked to respond to it immediately. They came back and said, well, the current law that you just passed is unconstitutional. You have to fix it this way. And that's what created Promesas.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. It would require federal action. And from my perspective, having done turnarounds, I don't think Pennsylvania is close to that.
No.
But Illinois is.
Illinois, and there were days where I thought New Jersey was close too.
Me too.
Although I think that's I'm not going to say they righted the ship, but they're in a better position now than they were, say, 6-7 years ago.
Do you think a bankruptcy or an insolvency in Illinois or some other state would cause the Commonwealth and all of us citizens create the political will to say, we have to fix these problems?
You may not like my answer, but no. I don't think something that happens in Illinois would have those, because whether it's right or wrong, I just don't think that would have that same type of repercussion here. I think people would view what has happened in Illinois. They've been so irresponsible for so long that they make our disagreements, which we obviously have, look like child's play. I mean, they didn't have a budget for 4 years. The governor who just lost, and I know part of this is, look, you had a Republican, like we have a Democratic governor, Republican legislature. There they had the reverse. As much as there were fights, you eventually came to a budget. His whole first term, they never had a budget. And again, I know the average person isn't worried about this, but there are days where I'll just be walking down the street going, how does this happen? I mean, so the short answer is, I think anyone that could look at that and say, they're so uniquely bad that it's hard to draw that correlation.
What I'd like to do is ask the members if you have any final questions. We have a hard stop at 10:50 because we're in session. So, Brett.
2 questions, unrelated. The approximate announcement of about the $800 million in surplus this year, what would you recommend be done with that money?
I would put it in a rainy day fund. I'd put it in a rainy day fund.
Okay. Second.
By the way, politically, I get not doing that. Spreading that around, doing grants. I understand the political desire to do that. I'm going to tell you, if you got the surplus, you already have your budget done, put it in a rainy day fund. The last time that rainy day fund was healthy, and September 11th hit, thank God the state had $3.2 billion in reserves. Because if something happens bad and it happens like that, you need to have the ability to deal with it. And that's my big concern right now with the federal government, is if something bad happens. When September 11th hit, we could get into whether it was Bill Clinton or Newt Gingrich who deserved the credit for it and all the other. Ignore that for just a second. The federal government was in a financial position to deal with the tragedy of September 11th. If something like that happened today, the federal government is not in position to deal with that.
I think you probably get some agreement on that up here as well, as I would advocate possibly adding some additional payments to our pension obligation.
Whatever you're doing, if you're not, by the way, one thing I would say is, if you're not putting it into the rainy day fund, it's because you're using it to reduce future payments down the line.
Next question. Brett, after your question, and Wendy's got a question, then General, I'd like to give you a chance to summarize.
Sure.
OPEB benefits, your thought on those. That's an often unseen obligation. Policy views going forward on giving out OPEB benefits?
I believe that both administrations in the last 2 contracts have made strides to deal with the retirement benefit issue. I do like the idea as an American that people have health insurance when they've put in a certain amount of time. There's almost a give and take with people that work for the public. That is, you do get, in many instances, I know there's been some other salaries lately, but for the most part, most of your rank and file employees, you're getting, if you're an engineer with PennDOT or somebody doing healthcare, Department of Health, you're generally getting a lesser salary, but a pretty healthy benefit package. We all know that the financial ramifications of that going forward became to the point of unsustainable. The last 2 contracts, retirees have had to pay more. There's another contract coming up. My assumption is that's going to continue. I think that is an appropriate response, but I also do believe it should be reflected on the balance sheet of the state because it is an obligation that is owed.
Thank you.
Do you think the state's in a financial position to borrow more money? Significant more for something brand new?
It depends on, I want to say this, it depends on if there's a source of revenue to pay for it. So the state, we refinance debt all the time, and so,
Right.
so let's just take that off the
Right.
table for
Agreed.
refinancing. But to just go out and do a major borrowing without a stream of revenue to pay for it, I would not be a fan of. But if there's a stream of revenue designated to pay for it, I think that's a different discussion.
So, just full disclosure, we both talking about Restore PA, or at least I am. And
I had a suspicion. I don't mean that negative. I mean, I kind of thought
agree. And I'm not debating what the money's getting used for and the need. I'm sickly concerned that if the stream of money doesn't flow the way it's predicted, we cannot afford to take that risk with the financial position that we're in today.
the need for that spending, again, whether it's the highest priority or not, let's just remove that from the
Right,
discussion.
that's a different.
But the idea that we need to upgrade our infrastructure, I think, is, I don't mean this to not,
No,
is not debatable. We need to do that. However, the means to pay for it should be stable and secure, and at least with a high degree of confidence that it's going to be there. And if I were in your shoes, I would be insisting on that 10 or 20 times over.
So, yes, and I'll let it get back, because I know, I'm sorry that I missed your earliest conversation on the pension.
That was my
outlook.
best part that you missed.
I will read up on it. But I would be okay if we're going to have a new funding stream, we spend what comes in that year. But to go out and borrow money with our bond rating and everything else that goes with it is too much risk for me.
Here's another one to sort of be aware about, and we all have learned, none of us are perfect, and you'll live and learn. Beware this one. We're going to spend the money, but we have a handshake agreement that in the fall we're going to vote on the new revenue. Like, I've been down that road before. We have as well. There is a way to make sure the handshake is real. Pass the bill. If there's spend now and then there's a handshake deal on doing the new tax or revenue later, bad idea. Bad idea.
As we get,
By the way, just so you know, in 2009, our leadership came in, when I was in the legislature, you might have been there, where you came in 10. They came in 2009. We got a handshake agreement that there's going to be a shale tax in the fall. That was in the spring of 2009. Now, I am looking here to make sure I'm correct on my calendar. It's 2019? Is that? Yes. No, I remember, like, they came in, we got a handshake, it's going to happen in the fall. That was 2009. I didn't have a bald spot then. I do now. I'm not, it is what it is. Because I'm not spraying it, I'm not going to do any of that stuff. But I'm telling you, with God as my witness, and you ask Greg Vitale, because he was, you can imagine Greg's pushback on the discussion. And there are times when I know Greg can drive some of us crazy. That was one where he was spot on. He's like, I don't want to hear about handshakes. I want to see the bill come up for a vote. That was in the spring of 2009. It's 2019.
the whole thing.
And the 76ers are still doing the process, by the way.
And Chris Davis is being replaced by me in the
That's
Baltimore
right.
lineup. It's not
Name
gonna
all
happen.
the things that were happening in 2009.
Right. We want to, first of all, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing this. And I would like to make some closing comments, but I really mean this sincerely. Your staff has been tremendous. I've appreciated your support. I think we've crafted some good
Don't
bills.
butter them up too much. I got more work for them.
Well, and I got to tell you, the reports,
Thank you.
I remember the discussion we had a little bit ago about how much money you've identified over that period of time. And we were,
I like your number better than their number.
well, we were pretty close in the number. We were hovering around the $800 million number.
I know, I'm teasing.
But it actually helped
I'm
us.
not teasing about that.
We actually crafted some additional bills. So I wanted to thank you. Now, I know Ben wants to say a comment, and I'd like to ask you for closing comments.
Thank you. And General, thanks for being here, and to the members for your insightful and great points on things. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you for the special audit, too. You know, I'm a big fan of the firearm safety report, so always take the opportunity to thank your office for that one. I use it frequently in the discussions. If you, I'll yield the time to you for your closing comments, but we didn't talk a lot more. You brought it up, the Pennsylvania State Police issue, but if you wanted to touch on that more in your comments, I'd invite you to do that. If it's too long a discussion, then no problem. I know we're basically out of time.
I'll touch on it briefly, then go to closing, is that I think the municipal pension issue plays a lot into this, but municipal governments getting rid of their police department and the state police having to do that coverage is draining the motor license fund, and that's not the state police's fault, but it's creating a real strain on PennDOT and funding roads and bridges. So the one thing so I've talked about some main themes: the economy, transportation, certainly prescription drugs we touched on, public education. The only thing I want to end with is please keep working together on these issues. Do not let the issues that we disagree on, whether they be social issues, what have you, pull you apart from working together on these financial responsibility issues. We've got to get better in our politics. And it's all of us. That if I've got an argument with you on issue X, that when it comes to working on issue Y and we're in agreement, I still don't hold that grudge on issue X. We've got to get better at that, because these financial issues, to me, are not going away. They are not sexy. Nobody's going to get a lot of credit for fixing it, but when you know what hits the fan and nobody addressed it, we're all rightfully going to get the blame. So just please keep working together in a nonpartisan fashion on these financial stability issues.
I can't thank you enough, General, for being here, and members, thanks for being here. I know we're back in session, so we'll get you a copy of the tape as well. But again, thank you for everything. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a great day.